So did everybody like it? I think he's a very sweet guy in the way he does it. And he gave a lot of respect to the farmers. He didn't trash any of the farmers. He treated them all gently and, you know, questioning, not critical. And I'll give you the results of our study. We're lucky in the state because we have like pesticide use reports that are actual use reports from the farmers. We have fertilizer use reports. And farmers are required to report how much genetically modified acreage they plant. So we're one of the few states where you can really look at the actual data. Most of the data is from the United States Department of Agriculture, and they're surveys. They're not actual use data. They just send you out a form just like a census form. And then you send back into them what you used that year, and so you can say anything you want, really. Because nobody's watching. There's only 3 states that have pesticide use reports: California, New York, and Vermont. And most of the rest of the states depend on the USDA surveys. So we decided, well, since Vermont has all these things, you know, and we kind of got mad during the last week or so of the hearings because the milk industry had been in like 3 times and testified over the 3-year period, with more hours given to the milk industry than any other testimony, because the milk industry is so powerful in Vermont. 75% of all of our agricultural product is our milk products. And 900,000 acres are devoted to dairy in the state. So it's huge. And 92,000 acres are devoted to corn production, and almost all of it is for dairy. A little bit for beef cows and lamb and so forth, but almost all for dairies. And so we started looking at the pesticide use reports because we said, well, because they said in the last week of their testimony, the dairy people, that pesticide use had dropped dramatically in Vermont. And that fertilizer use had dropped, and the use of the most toxic chemicals had gone way down. So when we looked at the pesticide use reports, we found out that only 8 pesticides accounted for 97.5% of use, 8 of them. And 6 of those 8 caused cancer. 7 of the 8 caused endocrine disruption. All 8 caused birth defects, and all 8 were water polluters. And we've got a serious water pollution problem in this state, as we're seeing with the play out in the legislature right now. There are 6 committees studying water pollution. So then we said, well, what about increase in use? So we started looking at it, and in 2002, only 8% of Vermont corn was genetically modified. By 2013, 96% of Vermont corn was genetically modified. So we compared the pesticide use to the genetic modification. And we were lucky because they passed this law in 2001 that said that the state had to collect data on GMOs. And we passed this law in 1998 that said the state had to collect pesticide use data. So when we looked at the data, we found out that pesticide use had been dropping just as genetically modified corn was introduced. And it had dropped from about 140,000 pounds in 1999 to 78,000 pounds in 2007. And just around 2007, genetic corn soared. And so we found an increase from 2007 until 2012 of doubling and more. Actually about 230% increase in pesticide use in that time. Wow. And you know, then we looked at the pesticides that were increasing. It wasn't just Roundup, glyphosate. It was metolachlor and acetochlor and atrazine. All 3 of these chemicals cause cancer. All 3 of these chemicals are banned. Not banned, but they're what do you call it, like registration has been canceled. And it's been canceled because they failed all of the tests.
In Europe.
In Europe, right, in the EU. And so, 4 of the 8 chemicals that we looked at had been, had lost their registration in the EU. And so, you know, that really worried us. And then 3 of the chemicals that were the most damaging chemicals were chemicals that were increasing just as Roundup was increasing and just as genetic modification was increasing. And then we said, well, let's look at fertilizer. And we looked at fertilizer, and we found out that there was a dramatic increase in fertilizer use at the same time. And of course, we're, you know, growing fewer cows on more acres is what's happening, because most of the cows are locked up. You know, we talk about Vermont as being this bucolic place that, you know, you have endless pasture and endless, you know, cows grazing on that pasture. As you drive around Vermont these days, you don't see a lot of cows out on the land, and that's because they're locked up. You know, we found out that like way over 70% of the cows are locked up in confinement operations, right? And they're bringing food to the cows, right? And so the fertilizer use is up, the pesticide use is up, and the most dangerous pesticide use is up. And the water pollution is enormous. And, you know, we're the only ones that are going to fix it. I mean, we're buying Ben & Jerry's ice cream and Cabot cheese thinking, God, this is so delicious. You know, and it's Vermont. So it's bound to be probably safer than other places, but it's not. You know, there's only 2 co-ops in the country, in the state, and one of them is the co-op that supplies Ben & Jerry's, St. Albans Co-op, and the other one is Agrimark, and they supply Cabot. They bought Cabot cheese some years ago. And so there's like 990 dairy farmers in the state, and there's almost 200 of them that are organic. The rest of them are all in those 2 co-ops. So all of their milk, all the milk in Vermont that isn't organic goes into those 2 co-ops. A few other small dairies that are raw milk dairies and so forth that aren't organic. In general, 99% of the milk probably goes into those 2 co-ops. And this is how they're growing their crops, right? And so, you know, our argument is like, we need to fix this. You know, this is like not a good statement about our brand. You know, the Vermont brand is powerful all over the world, right? And so it's like, we were distressed when we found this out. I mean, it's good to do research, but it's sad that you get the results like Seralini got with these rats, and you look at the study that Monsanto used exactly the same number of rats, but they only did the study for 3 months. And all of their studies are only 3-month studies. And usually the protocol for generally recognized as safe is you have to do 3-month studies, you have to do 120-day studies, you have to do 240-day studies, you have to do 1-year studies, and you have to do 2-year studies. Seralini studied these rats for 2 years because he was trying to say, this is the protocol that you do in studying things. And people said, well, it's vicious to keep those rats alive with all those tumors. And it is. I mean, I hate animal testing, but that's what people do to find stuff out. And what he was trying to do was duplicate exactly the same test that Monsanto did to get their corn approved, but do the studies for a longer period of time. Use 10 rats, with Sprague Dawley rats, and everybody knows that they are prone to tumors, right? But that's why Monsanto used them and said, look, they don't have any tumors. Well, they didn't do the study long enough to find out. And the USDA and the FDA has accepted that data from the companies, and the FDA has never done any studies on GMOs themselves. All of the studies have been done by the companies, and they submit it to the USDA and the FDA. So I'd be glad to answer any kinds of questions, and Kate, my wife, who knows way more than me about most of this stuff.
Not true, but I want to say it might be interesting for people to hear about the good stuff that's happening in Vermont too, the number of organic dairies and the programs and the rotational grazing stuff.
There's really,
that, you know, that's sort of where we should be going, it seems.
yeah, we don't have to do dairy the way we're doing dairy. We didn't used to do dairy like this, and we don't have to do dairy like this now, right? There's really good grazing experts in this state, and there's 200 organic dairies that are using rotational grazing and not feeding out a lot of corn and not just keeping their animals for 3 years and then selling them into the hamburger market, because that's what happens with GMOs. They get burnt out, right? And the animals are, you know, then are very short-lived. And most of the rotational grazed dairies, they want to keep their animals longer because they've taught them how to graze. I mean, you have to, it's a whole changeover, but the changeover is doable, and we want people to start advocating for that in their food system, you know, and we think that that can be done. And one of the reasons we tried to do this labeling thing, not that it's the end-all in the GMO issue, it's just like we've got to at least know what we're eating, right? We should be able to know what we're eating. And ultimately, we think that, you know, we can have a much better agriculture. We've been trying at our farm, and we just came back from Mexico, and we see really creative young farmers all over the world that are really excited about agriculture and are getting, like the Rodale Institute said, getting yields and quality that are right next to the chemical guys, and they do better in drought times and flood times. They just have a better land management strategy, and so things come out generally better. So we feel very positive, and like every place we go, people feel positive about the food system, but the one strangulation is the U.S. food system is completely devoted to like a confinement animal-based system, right? So there's 92.5% of our land is devoted to meat production and milk production, and only 7.5% of our land is devoted to vegetables and fruit and nuts and grains. So I mean, like, we've got a skewed system, and like we probably couldn't feed the world with that system anyway. You know, I mean, we did way too much land we'd have to put under animal production, right? So, you know, we're excited. We, like I say, we just came back from Mexico and watching young farmers. And when we first went down there, like several years ago, these people hadn't created anything, and they've come back and forth to our farm looking at stuff and saying, "Oh, let's try it like this and let's try it like that," and then we get stuff from them. And so there's a whole movement around the world, and you know, we're buoyed by it, and you should be too, because, you know, people really want to bring good food to the marketplace.
I'm fading, and I'm fading fast, and I have to get up and and start the week tomorrow morning really early. So I'm wondering, what can you tell me that I can do? What can I do right now? What's the most important thing that I can do to help to make a difference, to start the ball rolling personally?
You know, I could say policy, but really the thing that changes things the most is the marketplace. And what you buy really has an enormous impact on, you know, people are, like the little kid said, if people don't buy it, you know, they're not going to grow it anymore, right? And the thing is that people have stopped buying it all over the world, right? And you can have an impact on that. Right now, the places that it's sold are United States, Canada, Argentina, Brazil, a few other countries, really. I mean, 64 countries already label it, and as soon as you label it, people say, I'm not sure I want to eat that, you know, and so that's been our strategy. And I think the thing is, you can, you know, write to your legislator and try to get them to, you know, hold tight on this labeling bill, and, you know, they want to propose other bills about GMOs. And so anything you can, like one of the things we saw in getting the labeling bill passed, legislators came up after we'd won it and they said, the reason I voted this way, and I'm a Republican, is 1,500 people made phone calls, wrote me letters, or sent me emails. 1,500 people.
I would love to, like, be part of a mass effort, like, give me a phone number, tell me what to say. We just did this with, I'm a state employee, we just did this with our union.
Yeah.
And all of us on a specific day called the State House, asked to speak to our representative, and by the end of the day, the person who answered the phone gave me the blurb. I didn't have to say a word, but if we do that, I mean, I don't know who to contact, I don't know what avenue to go down, but I definitely would go there if I knew where to go.
Well, we have an organization in Vermont called Vermont Right to Know, and you can go right on that right away, and they're keeping up with not just what's going on with our lawsuit in Vermont, you know, because we're the first state that luckily passed that bill, but they keep up with what's going on around the country. Massachusetts looks very interesting. It really looks like there's a possibility that Massachusetts could pass a bill this year. Maine is trying to remove the trigger. Maine passed a bill that was similar to Vermont's, but they put a trigger on it, and that trigger said 20 million people in adjacent states had to also pass a bill before the Maine bill went into effect. And Connecticut passed a bill that had about the same wording as that. So what we're trying to do is get rid of that wording in Maine this year. And phone calls from outside the state have an enormous impact, as well as phone calls within the state. When we did the labeling thing, we had people call from all over the country. And one of the things now with social media, like once you tap into that a certain group of folks, you get social media on that issue all the time. So I would encourage you to go to Vermont Right to Know, and you can get quite a bit of information off that.
Vermont Right to Know.
Yeah, and we're keeping up with it.
Thank you so much.
Also, if you want to track things beyond Vermont, you can go to Organic Consumers Association or Center for Food Safety. Those websites track all these issues very closely, and you'll also learn about other federal initiatives that are happening, because there's an effort to label at the federal level. Obviously, nothing is going to get done with the makeup of the Congress right now, but there's another bill that's being pushed by, I don't know, I can't remember who, but it's
Pompeo.
called the Dark Act. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, like what happens is Pompeo put up this bill, Senator Pompeo, and it's he wants a bill that says that only the Food and Drug Administration is allowed to label genetically modified organisms, right? And that labeling will be largely directed by what the needs of the industry are. In other words, like, we don't want to label something if it's going to impact our markets, right? Or we want to label something for a variety of reasons. Anyway, they're trying to get that passed, and it's already passed the House. And it could, pardon me?
It would also preempt any state efforts.
Right, could preempt any state effort, right. It probably couldn't preempt Vermont's because we were before that, right? So we've beaten that preemption thing. But our goal is to try to get as many other states to pass it before they try to preempt it. Then I think it'll be difficult for them to pull that off. And it may not even be constitutional.
I agree with you that we as consumers can make a difference by buying organic, for example. Is there an effort to get schools to have to buy organic?
Well, I'd love to see that happen. I mean, like, I'd be willing to go give talks endlessly on that subject. And
well, it would have to be mandated by the state,
Yeah.
and then you would have opposition from the non-organic farmers. But it seems to me that's something people could rally around. We're concerned about what our kids are eating. We want them to have the best food possible. We want there to be a market for organic foods and milk, especially milk. How many schools sell milk to kids?
yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a great idea, but I think the other thing is you can start it right here. You know, let's go to the school board here and say, look, we want organic food. We've seen all these things. We know what's happening with our food system, and we don't feel it's safe for our kids. Because a lot of the food the kids get at these schools is food that is USDA surplus food, right? And so it's bad meat, bad milk, bad cheese. Sorry to say that, but it's true. And like a lot of times, the meat, you know, that rejected meat when it gets recalled, a lot of that meat is in the school system. And that's how people find out about it, because the kids get sick and then because they're more susceptible, their body size is smaller. So thanks a lot for coming. It's really nice.
Thank you.